stop overworking people. Because we do all of these, like, how can we address burnout? But I'm like, you can prevent burnout if we give people sane, healthy lives, right? Yeah. If we're not asking of them to do way more than is actually humanly possible.
One of the huge qualities that leads to burnout is choicelessness. And the biggest fields in which burnout occurs are the fields in which people deeply love.
How do we create spaces where people can acknowledge it, where I don't have to pretend that we can say, I'm actually feeling really scared and uncertain about what's going on right now?
If we start to accept the premise that it might be possible that emotions are the currency of human life,
wow,
then we might begin to realize, oh my God, of course my workforce is experiencing emotions.
Hello, folks. Welcome back. We are here for our third and unfortunately final session for this series with Roxy Manning and Sarah Peyton. Today, we're going to talk about emotional and psychological well-being. And I am really excited about this conversation, particularly because we get into some super spicy territory. So, you know, the Rajkumari way. Roxy, it is so great to have you back.
I'm glad to be with you again.
Awesome. And Sarah, so good to have you here.
I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, let's move to a new theme. Let's move to emotional and psychological well-being. Burnout.
Oh, burnout. Oh.
How do we even begin to address burnout with all of the stress that is out there? Whether it's burnout, whether it's overwhelm, whether it's feeling depressed or anxious, all of those mental health issues, what can we start to even do here?
Every time this conversation comes up, I want to start by saying, stop overworking people.
Stop
overworking people. Because we do all of these, like, how can we address burnout? But I'm like, you can prevent burnout if we give people sane, healthy lives, right? Yeah. If we're not asking of them to do way more than is actually humanly possible. So I would want any organization that's looking at how do we address burnout to say, and how are we changing our practices so that we're not asking more of people than they can actually give? Otherwise, we'll just keep addressing it and there'll be a cycle. We'll address it, you'll burn out. We'll address it again, you'll burn out. But nothing has changed about the causes of burnout.
Well, isn't that the whole epitome of capitalism and white supremacy?
Well, but isn't this why we're doing the work we're doing, so that we can change?
Yeah, but isn't this... No, just kidding. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, when I've looked at the research around burnout, one of the huge qualities that leads to burnout is choicelessness. And as Roxy said, having more than you can do. But the biggest fields in which burnout occurs are the fields in which people deeply love. So you get more burnout in social work settings and more burnout in education than you do in industry or in high tech. So it's not just about overworking and lots of hours. Like you get burnout with lawyers, but you get way more burnout with social workers, and lawyers work insane hours. Mm-hmm. So a part of what we need to hold comes back to mourning and the acknowledgement of emotions in the workplace. Because what happens is that it just brings me to tears, but social workers love their clients. Teachers love the kids. And they're being prevented from providing best care by the agencies and school boards and school districts that they're working for. And so we need to begin to really look at love and how it's being supported and whether decisions are being made for the well-being of the population that's being served, so that the people who are trying to implement the decisions are not having to implement decisions that are not out of love when their whole way of being and working in the world was predicated upon their huge hearts. So we just want to have that be part of our
And for me, this kind of goes back to the systems piece, right?
Yeah.
That a lot of times, what do we do about burnout focuses on the individual and changing or mitigating some impact that the individual has experienced versus changing what we're asking of people, changing the decisions we have them make. So it's again thinking about how are we doing business?
How are we doing business? That's such a great question. And that leads beautifully into the next one, which is, as we do business, how are we holding ourselves as an entity, as an organization, responsible in terms of addressing individual or collective trauma? Because organizations, well, at least the ones that I work with, are all about cultivating cultures of belonging. But that level of belonging can be interrupted from trauma experiences, whether they're generational trauma, whether they're individual trauma, whether they're environmental trauma. How do we start to work from that lens?
Well, we've been touching this in our other theme sections a bit, with talking about collective trauma in the world and how it impacts people inside the workforce. So we have that kind of trauma, which is like all the wars that are happening right now, or the climate crisis, and how it impacts people. And that then gets to be at least partially held with the kind of circles of ritual or mourning. What was it that you called it? There was a kudos board and a mourning board. Was that right? And that there would be little small rituals that start to hold this. But another piece of what is important to remember and think about that provides really interesting areas for consideration and thought is that all of the personal issues that employees bring to the workplace, all of the problems with addiction, all the problems with abuse, all the problems with mental illness that's not being supported and well cared for so that people can continue to be as functional as they can be. All of those kinds of things that we often, as Roxy has referred to before, kind of make personal instead of looking at the systemic. All of those things come from systemic issues and historical traumas that have impacted the different populations that are part of our workforce. And we're living in a world where our workforce is extremely global. So it requires a level of thoughtfulness and willingness to learn on the part of the leaders so that they know what are the impacts. Does this company have a lot of Irish people in it? If there's a lot of Irish people in it, we've got a background of the Great Famine in Ireland that is a part of the fabric of the personal problems that people are struggling with. If we've got a workforce that's both Ukrainian and Russian, then we've got a global conflict that's underway that's impacting the ability of teams to function well together. These things need to be known and held. I've been having conversations with global organizations where the leaders who are in China say, I don't need to know anything about the history of enslavement in the U.S. That has nothing to do with me, except they've got Black Americans in their workforce. And so if they're not allowing themselves to learn in service of the people that they're working with and for, then there's entire swaths of integration that are being left out of the puzzle of how to acknowledge, how to mourn, what to name, how to move forward.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's something around this piece that feels so many organizations are responsive or reactive, right? So something happens in the world and they're like, oh, we've got to do something because this group or that group will be impacted by it.
Mm-hmm.
But many of these things are long-term, historical. We could tell that there has been an ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine long before this war blew up, right?
Mm-hmm.
The history of enslavement, we know that that's existed and has had an impact on many communities long before, my brain just went dead, long before George Floyd's murder.
Mm-hmm.
And so waiting until something happens to say how we're going to hold this and address this as our community is in some ways abdicating, like, what is our responsibility to attend to the collective trauma in our communities. So I think it would be so beautiful if organizations can say, what are some of the kind of cultural things that are impacting our workforce, and check with the employees, like, what are the things you'd love support with or attention with, or the community challenges that you're facing. And then let that be part of what we offer. Either it could be as simple as a space where people can have these brown bag conversations about this. It could be elaborate. Bring in a speaker, bring in folks who can help them address this. But be proactive, not reactive to some of these things that happen.
That's incredible. I love that. Staying on the topic of mental health, depression.
Yeah, depression. I haven't looked at the research recently, but there's so much going on in the world that I wouldn't be surprised if people are reporting more and more and more depression. And especially now when there's so much layoffs, so much insecurity about just even my employment, and I'm thinking depression related to work, it wouldn't surprise me if we're seeing more and more employees showing up with this. And again, how are we responding to this as an organization? As a psychologist, I have to say that the United States is so far below what we need to do to provide adequate mental care for people. It's abysmal, and it's shocking, and it's shameful. And the fact that so many people can only get, these very limited, you get 10 sessions of behavioral health only, that doesn't actually address some of the challenges that many of us are facing with.
100%.
Yeah. So any organization, any leader who's listening to this, who has any influence and can get better mental health coverage for their workers, who could acknowledge that, of course, you're struggling with depression in this climate that we have, in this role that we have, with all of the insecurities that we have. So, of course, you need support. I would love to see a lot more concerted effort to give people those access to the resources they need.
There are so many psychologists in the United States. So many people are in therapy. Why is that not the case around the world?
Is it not? I don't 100% know that it is, but we don't have business practices that celebrate us as human beings. We expect people to work around the clock, full on, all the time. And so at minimum, I would say, if there is a difference, that would be part of the problem, that we don't have systems set up that allow people to have the maternal care that they need, time to be with their families, like so many things. Bereavement. My child died. I got one day off to go to take care of their funeral. And then everything else had to be this whole big process to get any time off. My ex worked for a company where he was lucky, and they were like, you get 3 months off. Just be with what's going up for you. I was at work 2 weeks later. And so why are people struggling? It's because our systems, our companies are not set up to treat people as human beings.
I want to circle back to depression just to make sure that we catch one of the elements of depression, which really speaks to this systemic part of the conversation that we're in, but goes really personal. And that is that this comes from the work of Jaak Panksepp and Douglas Watt. And Douglas Watt currently is one of the teachers at Harvard in the psychology department. And what he and Jaak Panksepp discovered was that depression was the result of a shutdown, a conservation of energy that comes for a system when there's too much alarmed aloneness. When the alarmed aloneness and the lack of support for a particular individual has become so great that they approach metabolic exhaustion, a state in which we will die And in order to prevent us from dying from metabolic exhaustion, we convert ourselves into a kind of a resting state and uses the patterning that we have with illness to shut down, kind of to put the body and brain into a semi-state of hibernation, a state which it is difficult for empathy to reach because it's a shutdown state. So a part of what is needed for the treatment of depression is the capacity of providers to look at what were the moments where the alarmed aloneness was so great. What are the different moments in this person's life? And because the brain, as you and I have talked about in past experiences of discussion, Rajkumari, the part of the brain that holds emotional memory of terrible alarmed aloneness actually doesn't timestamp it. Mm-hmm. So those moments, even though the person is in a shutdown state, those moments are still available for care. So there's a retroactive reaching into our past to hold the moments where society really has failed to provide responsiveness for this person. And I think once we start to talk about the roots of depression in this way, it allows us to begin to think proactively also about where can the system that I'm a part of begin to create more social support and connection for the workforce, for example. So I wanted to bring that part forward.
There's so much opportunity to look at alarmed aloneness. Can you define actually what alarmed aloneness is for our audience?
Sure. So we often talk about fight, flight, freeze. It sounds like we would just be upset when we were fighting, when we're angry, or when we're fleeing, when we're afraid. But there's actually a third quality that can be present in humans' distress. And that quality is the quality of losing somebody who's important to us or not having social connection and community. And that state puts us into increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, heart palpitations. Alarmed aloneness impacts us physically. Loneliness is more harmful to the human heart than being a pack-a-day cigarette smoker. So what happens then is that as a society, as a culture, even a worldwide culture, we tend not to name alarmed aloneness as one of the factors that really impacts humans. We forget how exquisitely social humans are. Like me sitting right here with these two beautiful people, I don't have any alarmed aloneness at all. I'm with my people. This is wonderful. This is nourishing. We're talking about stuff that really matters, and we're reaching out to people to give people a sense of really mattering. And this is important, and we're here together, doing it together. So yummy. And we often just don't name it. We just don't name alarmed aloneness. Scientists will call it separation distress, but that doesn't capture for me this quality that we can, like, not even be separated from someone. We can be separated from everyone. And so how did that land? Rajkumari, was that a good definition?
Beautiful. And I'm wondering, is there emotion coming up for you as you share
Totally. Yeah, the emotion of tenderness and love, and the emotion of mourning for our world.
Yeah. For those who are listening in the audience, Sarah actually gesticulated toward me when she used the word palpitations. And I have, recently come into a very sweet romantic relationship and have noticed such a calming of my physiological responses in a way that I've never experienced in the last 13 years. So you are, naming something that is so potent and so true, certainly for me. Wow. Do you would like to add anything?
No, I'm just actually sitting in the sweetness of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Insecurity. one of the things that I hear so often with shifts or changes within organizations is first the word uncertainty, and then that kind of becomes the main entree of the conversation. But what's underneath that, of course, is the insecurity of what that means to them, their livelihood, their family, the stability, the financial well-being, all of the things.
I'm noticing a theme in how we're talking about this because, again, it's about how do we create spaces where people can acknowledge it, where I don't have to pretend that, everything is solid and great and I'm strong, that we can say I'm actually feeling really scared and uncertain about what's going on right now and have that kind of resonant catch of what that experience is. So that's one piece that I think is really important, to create spaces where people could name what their truth is and not have to feel ashamed or somehow less professional because they named that. Another thing is I see so many organizations that they're not transparent. They're not actually telling people what's going on. And so everyone's whispering, there's all this gossip. We know something is happening, but no one's actually giving us the information we need. And there's so much fear. Like if we tell people they're going to start leaving, they're going to start looking, for a different position. I'd much rather bring people in and be authentic and real with them. Here's where we are. Here's what I need from you. What do you need from me? So it's both giving people a space to be heard about what's going on and giving them more choice, kind of going back to this choicefulness thing about once I do know what's going on, how do I want to respond?
And this question makes me realize that I didn't completely close the circle about why it's important to name emotions. So I'll just go back to that for a little moment. And this comes from the research of Matthew Lieberman at UCLA. And he discovered, he was like, name it to that whole name it to tame it thing. Could it be true that if you name your emotions, your brain calms? And what he did was he stuck people into fMRI machines and discovered that when they named the correct emotion, the emotion that actually matched the emotion. So if it was anger and they named sadness, the activity in their amygdala did not go down. But if it was anger and they named anger, the activity in their amygdala went down. So if we start to accept the premise that it might be possible that emotions are the currency of human life,
wow,
then we might begin to realize, oh my God, of course my workforce is experiencing emotions. Of course my workforce needs them to be guessed at, to be named, for there to be places in which they can name these emotions themselves, where it's not put behind the curtain, we get to get the Wizard of Oz out from behind the curtain and see that he's nothing scary, that really emotions are just what's needed.
Emotions are the currency of life, but it is not the currency of capitalism. And I think you nailed it. I think I love that quote, and I think you nailed it. And we have been conditioned over millennia to not see, I'm getting so emotional, to not see the currency of emotion as the true definition of being human. You said something in class. I've invited you a couple of times to come to class, and you said something that just shocked me, and people kept repeating it in the chat. It was something about when the body hears the truth, it relaxes.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
You got it right.
Can you talk about that?
Not only does the body relax when we hear the truth, so that's from this research that Matthew Lieberman did, where the amygdala relaxes. Once the amygdala relaxes, the body relaxes. Once the body relaxes, the amygdala feels even more safe and relaxes more. It's a lovely kind of building spiral of goodness. But not only that, but complex emotion, and this is a cool thing. Naming complex emotion improves the workings of the immune system and makes wounds heal faster.
Does complex mean like paradoxical experiences?
Yeah, like that you get to name that you got relief that your boss was just laid off and you have grief.
Holy moly cannoli.
Yes.
Inside Out had it right all along.
We were driving here and I was seeing the posters for Inside Out 2.
Wow. I did not know that. That's fabulous.
I know. It's so cool. They figured that out by having a bunch of senior citizens in New Zealand write down. They had half the group write down what they had for dinner and breakfast, make a dietary journal so that they were writing about what their life was like. And the other half named these complex and paradoxical emotions. And they watched their rates of healing. Yeah. And it was,
Wow.
Yeah. It was markedly faster.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So don't have your team talk about what they had for breakfast.
Or do, but also bring up your emotions while you're doing it. There you go. Please, Roxy.
Yeah, I'm kind of going back a little bit. When you talked about uncertainty, the other thing that I was tracking is there's uncertainty in the workplace, but there's also just the acknowledgement that we're living in these incredibly uncertain times, right? And there's so many like young adults who are saying, I'm never having kids because I don't know if there's going to be a world 20, 30 years from now. And I think we underestimate the impact of that for so many of us, that the kind of certainty that I had as a child, that I'm going to go to school, go to college, blah, 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 and my life is going to be a certain way. There's an entire generation that doesn't have that doesn't know what the future is going to hold. And that's another whole other layer of having to deal with uncertainty that we don't often talk about, but that impacts how we show up in the workplace.
For sure.
It impacts my sense of like, what's the point? I'm going to spend all of this energy and time about this little thing when, there's a war happening in Gaza. And so it kind of goes back to what you had asked earlier. How do we acknowledge some of these collective traumas, some of these bigger uncertainties, some of the complexities? I'm happy I've got this job and, my family and my relatives are dying or are at risk at some other place.
Yep.
How do we hold that multiple truths?
Absolutely.
And so it speaks again to the importance of not only being able to name it, not only having workplace structures where we can have these conversations, but also giving people access to like mental health care, to deeper systems to hold some of these problems that we're dealing with.
Wow, I want to go in so many different directions. I want to just touch on what you just shared, Roxy, because I think from what I've witnessed in so many of my coachees, the next question would be, so what do I do about it? Where's the action? Where do I go and bring in that sense of control? And I would say that the doing part is actually the being part. That the doing part is the acknowledging that there is so much uncertainty.
I would add more. I absolutely agree. I think we need to start there. We need to be able to acknowledge, name it, and create spaces where people can talk about it. But I also want to see organizations and leadership thinking about the places where can we actually do something, not just talk about it, right? So if our organization, some organizations I know, like one organization famously has a 20% project and people can choose, like, where am I going to put my time, right? And so that could be a place where you could tell someone, what's a big world issue you want to put your 20% time into? Where's a place where you think you might be able to have an impact? Where can we get together and say, how would we like to invest this company's fund? Or where are we making choices about, which 401k plans we invest in and how they are supporting the kinds of changes we want to see in the world. So I don't want us to, it can become really easy to say, oh, it's just about the being. We need that. But I also want to acknowledge that there are things we can be doing that can have an impact on what's happening in the world and that will give people that sense of agency that's so missing from so many lives.
As you are holding this pillar of anti-racism in this statement, how do we begin to work with organizations that either are denying that racism exists wholeheartedly, or how do we start to have conversations with individuals who are denying that racism exists wholeheartedly?
I think for me, part of it, there's both, can I have a conversation? And there's what can I do? And sometimes I'm not actually interested in a conversation, and I want to lead with that. Sometimes it's like, if you're the kind of person who's saying, let's pass this legislation, let's do X, Y, or Z, let's dismantle our DEI committee, I'm willing to work around you. I'm willing to find a person who has the power and leverage to say, how can we do the things we need to have done? What can I do to actually have an impact? So it's not always about having the conversation. I believe there's both. Where I can, I need to take action, and I need to figure out where the places where I have leverage and use that. That said, and I really like leading with that, because that's where change happens, right? When we say we're actually taking steps that we can take. But sometimes I do want to have that conversation with someone. And to the extent that I have capacity, this is where I tell folks who want to be allies, right? If you are cisgender, straight, hetero, blah, 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 this is where you can show up and say, hey, I actually want to have that conversation with that person. You don't have to be the only person having this conversation. It's not only on the backs of the people who are directly impacted to have those conversations. So this is where I want to maybe call in some of my allies to avoid the kind of burnout, to avoid the kind of hopelessness I feel about engaging in these really painful conversations over and over and over again. And then how do I have those conversations? Again, it depends on who I am. If I'm the ally, start by empathizing with the person who's advocating for some of these really painful policies, because I think those people need to be heard. They need some understanding about, why are you advocating for this? Like, what need is it meeting for you? Because it's meeting a need. If it was meeting no need at all, there would be no investment in advocating for it. So listen to them, give them some support, help them understand why this is important to them, and then help them find a different strategy to meet that need. And that's for the person who's the ally. That's the work you can do if you're an ally.
I love that.
For the folks who are directly impacted, who are dying, or who are seeing their communities die because of some of these policies, get support first. This is where we need grieving and mourning circles. Be really mindful about, is this really the conversation I want to have? Does it feel fruitful? Am I battering this door that's like a steel door that's never going to open? Because you don't need to do that. You can take care of yourself. And if you decide to be in that conversation, be really clear. What is my objective? When I talk to people about the different kinds of conversations we could have, is it a conversation around shared understanding? Is it a conversation around wanting you to understand my position? Is it around healing? Like, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? And keep your eye on that goal rather than letting yourself get drawn into this long-winded conversation that's not going to go anywhere. That's just people throwing facts back and forth.
Right.
I'm just really loving what Roxy's saying here. I guess there's the one thing to add is that what we see over and over again that changes the hearts of folks who are mired in white supremacy beliefs or the Christian right wing that's opposed to any kind of alternate gender and sexuality expressions, that the thing that changes people most is relationship and the sharing of impact. And this is something that you went to much earlier in this conversation in a different theme, Roxy, is about how does it impact that vulnerable sharing, about how does it impact us that this is happening. And so for folks who do end up having relational connections with somebody who's on the other side of whatever the political question, or it almost doesn't feel like these questions about race and gender and sexuality are political questions. They feel like life and death questions to me right now. So if somebody else is on the other side of a life and death question, we do get to lean into and looking at, I think there's a piece of research that helps me a little bit here, which is, it's that if you have a world that's scarce, or a world that's abundant, then the same person will express different political views.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you take a conservative person and you ask them traditional conservative questions and they answer in traditional conservative ways, and then you say to them, I'd like you to imagine a world where you did not have to worry about scarcity, a world where there was enough for everybody, then all of a sudden they'll give progressive answers to those same questions if they have themselves in an abundance mindset instead of in a scarcity mindset.
Are you serious?
I'm totally serious. And so a part of what I hold as we're moving into these difficult times because of the climate crisis, things are, in my projection, going to become only more scarce. Then I feel like our mission is to create islands of love in which we can have enough abundance and a sense of what we really value, that we provide each other some strength and support, and we don't have to be in alarmed aloneness in the middle of a world that's really suffering.
This actually really resonates with me. I think so many of us, especially, at least from my experience living in the US, we're very alone. We're very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
I live 3,000 miles away from my family.
Mm-hmm.
And so so many people don't live near their families. They don't have a sense of community. And if I don't have a sense of community and I see the world falling apart around me, I feel eager, desperate for anybody who could tell me, you're my tribe, you're going to be safe. And so if we can start to help people establish, no, there's a larger community here, communities of care. If we can start to really develop programs, like in my community, I would love to see us have like shared things like, even little things like one of the things I really want someone to build for me is one of those little library boxes. What are they called?
Little libraries, I think.
Yeah, those little. Oh gosh, I totally.
You're walking on the sidewalk, and then those little books are available. Then you can just
exactly
take.
Right.
Oh my God, where is one? I need to drop off books.
There's so many that I know. I love them, but it's the concept of that. Like in my neighborhood, there are those for books, but there are also those for food. And
yes,
there's a park, and you just put food in there, and there's even a cooler, and you could put cold goods in there. Yeah. Show us that we can take care of each other and let us be in communities where this is the norm. Yeah. And I think people will feel less dependent on the powerful savior because we can do it for each other.
I love that.
So start developing this, and we can do this at work, right? Yeah. At my job, I also work part-time as a psychologist. One of the things that we have is people can say, I want to donate some of my leave time to you so that you can take time off for this thing if you don't have enough leave, right? We can care for each other, and we can set up systems where this kind of care is easy to access.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And I think that will help us feel less dependent on some of these authoritarian fascist figures.
That's fantastic. You and I had talked about, Sarah, a while ago, the individual who is actually threatened by safety. I would venture to guess that the three of us are in favor of community and community building. How do we start to build communities or the understanding of the value of community in organizations when we have individuals who feel threatened by community, who feel threatened through the experience of feeling safe, that what they need to feel alive is hostility, is violence of some sort. What do we do with those individuals? How do we create truly inclusive cultures? Can we?
I always love giving people choice, first of all, because one of the things that one of my favorite neuroscience researchers, James A. Cohen, talks about co-regulation and how when we have a sense of safety and connectedness, then we're actually using less brain energy, less physical energy. And when we don't have a sense that people are safe, then even if we're with people, we're not going to feel like we're with them. And so our neurobiology will not shift the way that human neurobiology can when we really have a sense of community that feels good to us. So if we're coming out of a past where there was bullying, or where a family wasn't safe, or where a church wasn't a safe place, or previous experiences of workplace bullying, then our bodies, instead of being able to relax into and share the load, our bodies will be tense and we'll be holding ourselves apart from others. And I think it's just really important not to make that wrong. I think it's really important to normalize that of like, yeah, of course, some people's bodies get more tense around people than get relaxed around people. If we've never had the experience of being in a group where there's resonance and respect and love and care, then we're going to be like, what are these people doing?
Right.
These people are crazy. You can't trust warmth.
Yeah.
And that's really important to acknowledge. I mean, it's just, we make sense. One of the things I love about neuroscience is that we just make sense in every cell. And I think, Roxy, you go back to that again and again when you're like, what's happening with this person? I'm really curious about them. What's blocking them? You know, you're like, people make sense. There's something that makes sense here.
I'm still kind of sitting with this hypothetical person and the kind of wanting them to make sense. I think the piece that you're naming around building true community, building beloved community, means everyone's part of it, including the person who says, I want conflict. I need this in order to feel safe, or I need to be away from community in order to feel safe. Yeah. So it's essentially defining community not about it looking a certain way, but about what does it mean about our relationships and how we're caring for each other and how we're supporting each other or not. And maybe the kind of support I need is that I get to live at the edge of town, right? The people whose houses were like 200 meters past everyone else's houses. But I know that if something happened and I yelled, somebody would come. But I don't want to live near you. That's far enough. So how do we create space for that to really assess what is it that you actually need rather than this is the only way that we can be in community. This is the only way. The other thing is, again, kind of going back to your feedback questions, if someone's showing up in a way that's actually having an impact, for me, that's different than do you need a certain kind of stimulation? I still would want you to know about the impact. I still would want you to know, like, what is this doing for you? How is it supporting you? And is there a different way you can get that need met that isn't so costly for everyone else around you? And having some really heartfelt conversations.
And if someone responds with, I don't care about the impact on others?
Yeah, well, then I would also check in around the impact on them. Because it's a lot of times we frame those conversations in, you're doing this, it's impacting and hurting other people. My guess is it's also having a cost for them. So if I can help them to see the costs for them and how they're showing up, getting their needs met for stimulation or for safety, it's only one set of needs. I'm guessing there are a whole bunch of other needs that are not met in the way that they're showing up. If I can help them to connect to that, I might be able to help them choose to shift their strategies.
Honestly, I wish we had 14 more pages of questions that we could just keep this conversation going. I have absolutely been delighted by this conversation. Thank you both so much. In closing, last question for both of you. What is it that you hope for the future? I'm just going to leave it right there. I know we've covered so many things and so many topics. So I'll just leave it wide open.
If I want to keep it super broad, I would love to have a future where every child growing up knows that they're valued, knows that their needs will be met, and has a path towards finding meaning and purpose in life. Because I think if we had those things, so much of the challenges we're experiencing would go away. You know?
I agree.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I love that. My most impossible hope is that we somehow avert or slow or stop the climate crisis so that we have about 2,000 years. I think we need 2,000 years to take over the earth. with resonance and empathy and anti-racism and sense making, and to let every human and every child know that they make sense and that they've just no more little ones dying anywhere in wars. Yeah, that's what I want.
It's beautiful. Roxy, Sarah, thank you so much for today. Thank you for making this happen, both of you.
What a pleasure.
Absolutely.